Tonight's lecture is given by Hernan Diaz Alonso, sitting right in front of me here. Long-time friend of us here at Penn, before that a long-time friend in many other places, and is now already 4 years the director of SCI-Arc, where before that he was for many years teaching and directing advanced programs. Hernan studied at the National University of Rosario in Argentina and earned his advanced architectural degree from Columbia in New York City. He previously held several appointments, often honorary ones, at Yale, Columbia, University of Applied Arts in Vienna with Wolf. And Design Intelligence named him one of the 25 most admired educators in 2018 to 19. He won the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Architecture Award, actually this year in 2019, so congratulations, Hernan. And is the principal of the Los Angeles-based architecture firm now called HDA/X. So it's formerly known as, the AKA. Before that, it was actually much easier because Zafiro Tark was his original name from his office. It's same office, just new name for different reasons. That office we started in 2001, but what did he before that? I said to him, actually, it's really interesting for students to see how do you start your own office. And Hernan started working and building in Argentina before he came to Spain, where he worked for Enrique Miralles. He worked, for example, on the Santa Catarina marketplace, where he did one of the first studies in 1996, and then worked for himself a little bit more, and then started working for Peter Eisenman. It seems like a lot of people here have gone through Peter Eisenman's office, which is always a good thing, I think.
We all survivors.
Yeah, exactly. It's like commando training in architecture. It kind of is. So that was in New York, and then, so that right after 2001, he started his own office. His multidisciplinary practice is praised for its work at the intersection of design, animation, interactive environments, and radical architectural explorations. Hernan states, or one of the statements he makes, because he does like to make statements, is that architecture is more than a building. And in quoting one of his friends, which I also liked, he said, architecture really is a genius solution to a non-existing problem, which also is kind of good. And quoting one, and getting more serious, that architecture ultimately is the synthesis of culture. He has been known to discuss mutations in architecture, the pursuit of horror, and the grotesque, among other things. His fearless approach of architecture, which I really admire, and I think many of us really admire, and maybe his fearless approach of his clients, has had many results, one of which was that Hernan has done absolutely stunning and amazing investigations in museums, galleries, and I think one of the most known one is his winning design for MoMA's PS1 Young Architects program, which he called Sur, and Sur is a title of a tango song. But if you saw, and hopefully he'll show it, I don't know whether you still show that, Hernan, but it's an absolutely amazing installation that really does look like the elements are dancing. That project he sees as a project that is part of a series of projects which are directly related to his competition entry for the Busan Concert Hall, which earned him a 4th prize. PS1 operated with a logic that starts with singular cells that multiplies based on the coding of them. It begins to behave much like an organism that relates to each other, creating a whole where the parts are not modular. Rather, it's an incremental variation of a singular unit, the grotesque and horrific all at once. Furthermore, his work has been featured in exhibitions at the Venice Biennale, the London Architecture Biennale, Archilab in Orléans, France, where we also met each other, and the permanent collections of the FRAC, SF MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, Thyssen Bornemisma, the MAC Museum in Vienna, and the Art Institute in Chicago. In 2008, we found ourselves in a very peculiar event that was organized by the Getty in LA. And it was called, actually they called it a major symposium against rationalism, and it was called Against Reason, John Lautner and the Post-War Architecture. And basically we were asked to do an intervention on a Lautner house. And the Getty stated this program challenges each member of the panel of avant-garde architects to create an addition to one of Lautner's creations, thereby actively engaging his built legacy. Their solutions there, as in our, solutions to this theoretical design challenge, potentially both sacrilegious and revelatory, are unveiled at this event. Which was really interesting because we have a lot of architects and a lot of really spectacular designs, but I don't think any of us got paid, nor did they ever show it anywhere. So it probably really was what they said it was. I think we can declare it a success. So this was a design charrette and a provocative discussion, which it was, and the program was moderated by Christopher James Alexander, the associate curator of the Getty. Hernan, to go back to Hernan, he won also in 2012 the Educator of the Year Award from the AIA and the 2013 AR&D Award from as an emerging architect and the Progressive Architecture Award for his design of the Thyssen Bonomisma Pavilion and Museum in Patagonia in Argentina. Please join me in welcoming Hernan.
Thank you, Winka. That's a wonderful introduction. Couple of comments on that front. Those statements, yeah, I tend to do those statements. Many of them, and quite often, are very stupid. Hopefully, I will not make one of those tonight. That's how it goes. The other thing is, these emerging things is funny because I'm already a 50-year-old man, but in architecture, you don't build much, like I don't, so you keep emerging until very late in your career. So it's a good thing. So there's plenty of time to keep emerging. And the other one is a multidisciplinary thing. It's just an excuse to say that we are very unsuccessful in many fields of design. Like we fail pretty much with that. And when she talks about clients, we tend to have clients for like a week, and then they go away. So the work I will show you, which is kind of the work of the last, 15, 16 years, focuses more in the recent work, is there are all these beloved attempts to do interesting stuff that they all fail commercially, miserably. But because we are in America and academia is very generous to all of us, allows us, people like me, to have what I will call a speculative firm. There is a very interesting story. My accountant figured out a way in which my office can be linked to my teaching, because basically my office only exists to sustain my status as a professor, or in this case as a director. So my office is really a research waste of money that exists to support the other things. So in any case, but we keep trying with a lot of energy and happiness. I'm a little bit under the weather, so sorry if I cough or sneeze or other things in between. But it's always a pleasure to be here. Winka is a dear friend. We know each other for more than 20 years or so. And this is a school that I love. I never taught here, but somehow actually the first review of my career in America was here. It was Ali Rahim who invited me in '99. So I've been coming to Penn for 20 years. So this is a school that I think is doing the best design work in the East Coast. It's okay. We divide in the country in two parts. Penn is taking the East Coast, we're trying to take the West Coast. But it's also, in recent years, since Winka leadership, I think has become a really sister institution with SCI-Arc. We have a really fluid relation. I think it was born out of personal friendships and stuff like that, but also I think it has to do with a common goal and to keep embracing that. So even though the lecture today is about my work and the work in my office, I cannot separate my work in my office for my 20 years of life in SCI-Arc. I mean, it's all intertwined in one way or another. And there are very dear friends here and mentors and people like Wolf Prix who gave me job and was my boss for many years in Vienna. And that was also another interesting place. Anyway, so I'm here in a way. Originally, I was supposed to lecture here to present the new monograph. They was supposed to come in August, but it's coming in February because we delivered it late. So I'm showing kind of the work that is in the book of a book that is not ready yet. It will be out in February. Buy it, don't buy it, it's okay. I was not even convinced to do a book. This is the original cover I wanted to have, which are the X-rays of my teeth. Which they're pretty okay, I think. But this is the cover at the end, which is okay. It is what it is. The sales and branding department of Thames and Hudson decided that this will sell more. I don't know how they come to that conclusion. But they let me do whatever I want with inside the 400 pages, so it was, I think, a minor concession. Also, the title is their title. I'm not so interested in surrealism, but what the hell. That's the title of the book. Anyway, check it out in February, whatever. So let's get to work. So the talk is, in many ways, I always half serious, half joke. I always say I'm a man of simple taste, in the sense of I consider myself a designer and just a designer and nothing but a designer, which means whatever we do in the work in the office in one way or another is always driven by doing it and figuring out things as you do it. It's not different than make the bed every day in your house or making bread or anything that you know how to do. So there is a logic that carries from one to another. We tend to work in multiple projects. But if I have to give, if we can turn off the fluorescent lights so people can take a nap. But in a way, if I have to, it's possible to turn off the fluorescent lights? They're here. I control this, but I don't know what to do with it. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now I feel like I'm going to start. More like I feel like I'm in an interrogatory room. But if I had to summarize one way or the other, the way of the work, the way that we were working, there are certain recurrent themes that has been present one way or another over these years of work. Form follows form. I'm never been one of those guys who form follows function. There is somebody there with less is more, all good. I'm more like more is more. And also, I'm interested in always a kind of a counterintuitive or reverse engineer of logic. Like, if you're interested in form, therefore you're interested in the problem of beauty. As such, I've always been interested in the grotesque and the horrific as alternative vehicles to arrive to that. I think editing in our work has replaced composition, even though there is a lot of composition in what we do, but I think embracing animation software and camera work has become a different way for us to work. I believe the architecture process is collapsing into a much more compressed way how you work. I was educated in an analog way in which you work through plans, sections, and models, and somehow the coherency would emerge. Now that's collapsing into something differently. We really engage in technology, not only as a replacement of craft, as a different form of craft. And the idea that systems kind of replace geometry, but ultimately the most important one, if I had to pick one, is image as the vehicle for the production of form instead of with drawings or geometry as the vehicle for the production of form. So in this context, we try to operate with multiplicity. We tend to work in multiple projects at a time. This is something that actually is not really an original thought. This is something actually I learned kind of stole from Enrique Mirages. Enrique has this ability to work in multiple projects at a time and create families of projects. And what he will call, and I agree with it, and call autopsy of process in a way that the previous project becomes the beginning of the next project. So in a way, the mechanism of the logic of the project, or the office, has been evolving over the years. This is some of the recent projects, but if I want to, this is a little tribute to Wolf, but also is one of my heroes too, Keith Richards. For those of you who are very young in the audience, it's a guitar, the main guitar and one of the two composers of the Rolling Stones. Very important band, is still alive and playing. But what I've always been interested in is the idea of new coherences in the sense of when you think about the sound of the Rolling Stones, it's really a mutation of blues music. So it's always about, in the design culture, architecture culture, I really think you cannot produce anything new. You can produce innovative things, but not through newness. So I've always been interested in this idea of new coherences that come from mixing different things, get it out of tune. And a little bit that is why the name of the lecture, Electric Mud, which really comes from Muddy Waters, a great blues player. But this idea that is a combination of something that is kind of is tough and disgusting or dirty, and something that is highly technological, and that intersection. I didn't know that at the beginning of this process. This is something that it became more evident in recent years. At the beginning of the process in early 2005, or that period of time, we were really trying to navigate and to kind of develop a relation with the software and the technologies that were available. This is PS1 that Winka was mentioning in the introduction, which it was a way to start to think about these possibilities in which the technology became like a partner and really try at the beginning to try to control it. Again, this in 2019 seems very obsolete, but if you put in the context of 15 years ago, this was a territory in which the power of even the morals of the ethics of design in relation to computer was still very much an open-end question. I think today we have different positions and more clarity in relation to it. But I will say that the important part of this project, except aside that we were lucky to win and to build it, was that it was the first one that we start to feel comfortable in the idea that this could be much more a manipulation and start to find a way that you can control it and in a way corrupt the system. So the animation I'm showing you is the same animation that we showed to the jury, and the idea was to really start to embrace the animation software, not as a tool only of representation, but as a tool of simulation, but as a way to think through the design. So the idea was that you will never get to see the whole thing until at the end, a little bit like Aliens of Ridley Scott. So we won it, we built it, and there was a couple of interesting after effects that happened. This is 1 or 2 days before the opening. And we took a picture, and I remember I sent it by email at that time in low res. It's not like today you can text it and whatever. It seems like so obsolete. And a couple of people respond back, wow, nice photo montage. And it was an interesting idea because it was the notion that reality started to become a simulation of something that is a simulation, and that relation started to blur. And this notion of parallel reality started to work. But also early on, when we were doing the structure, which was almost 1,500 different parts, which is a very stupid thing to do, and we will never do it again. But it was one of the first times that we started to also figure out algorithm, how to put it together and a family, because we only had 2 months. These are all the 2 pieces of the structure and so on, and the opening. But what it was interesting was that project was the one that, in a way, catapult an idea in which we start to feel that it was not any longer more like you were navigating or surfing the technology, but it became more like a partnership and start to figure out what I can give you. The year after, we did a solo show on the SF MoMA, in which again, as I said, we don't get to build many things. As a matter of fact, PS1 was the last thing that we built of certain scale. So when we get shows in museums and so on, in this blurred category between art and architecture, we always try to convince them to let us do something that is not a typical architecture show or an art show. So in this case, what we wanted to do was to tell a story how we were producing projects at the time, which was based on this idea of a species and cells, that you can over-design the cells, and after the cells you can create a whole series of projects. So we built this display system in which we have models, and we will have animations and how these things mutate. So there was a version of this in the SF MoMA, and then there was a second version of it in the Art Institute in Chicago, which in which the display system was breaking into multiple parts. It called Sangre, because at that time we were looking into mutations of blood and things like that. Everybody was kind of to the pseudoscientific idea in this period. So in a way, many of the things that we were working on at that time, it were very much in parallel with a lot of colleagues, and some of them are in this room, and share interests, and we have. I mean, architecture at the end of the day, it is a collective endeavor, and you contaminate and you learn from each other. A couple of months after, we did this show in Vienna. We call it Pitch Black. It was in one of the galleries in the underground, so we painted all black. But unlike PS1, in which we're using animation to generate mutation, in this one, what the desire was the physicality of the thing to try to be like animation. And we were very lucky. It was at the same time that Cop Himmelblau had the big show at the MAC, and we were having our small show. So it was an interesting times at that time at the MAC that they were doing all these architecture shows, and they give us the opportunity to speculate with these things. So in this case was the first one that also we start to challenge the precision of it. So we start to work, I think, Brian, do you work in this one? Brian De Luna work on this one. So whatever is good is me, whatever is bad is him. But what was interesting was we reverse engineer. We were working with some liquid fluids, particles. So the idea was to start reverse engineering, start with the precision of the form, to try something informal, and then put under control, and then to figure out how to fabricate it. But unlike PS1, all the pieces were the same, and we just did the small rotations, how we were setting it up, so it can produce the effect of variation. I think that's Mattia del Campo, who was helping us in Vienna to assemble it. It's one of the few things that I still, I don't know, 13 years later, I still kind of like it. But also what it was interesting about it, it was a moment in which this blur between art and architecture is interesting, because art will not accept this as art and architecture will not accept it. But even though it has a scale or artistic effect, it's really thought through the eyes of an architect, because it has more pieces that they need to have. It has all the tectonics. An artist will never do it like that. So we would think about how we would assemble it. All the stupid things that architects we tend to do, that artists tend to be sometimes more pragmatic. But an interesting phenomenon happened, like in 2016 or 17, I don't remember. They opened a museum in Shanghai of 3D printing. And so they asked us for this. And it's a new form in interesting territory, because basically we didn't do the show for them, we didn't do anything, we just sold them the files. And they manufacture, they produce it, and they invite us to the opening, and they did that with us, with what we send them. I don't think it's better or worse, it is what it is. But also it takes about 15 years of difference between how you think about it, and also in the territory when we are, and what does it mean in terms of the cultural design and the commercial side and the practice of it. It comes with a lot of interesting, weird things. In parallel, I mentioned that we tend to work with families of projects. We tend to work with, this is what the period that somebody very close to me will call it Mercurial chewing gum architecture. In parallel to the MAC, we were invited to do this competition for a guest house of a fairly interesting art collector in Paris. Outside Paris, she has a house that was done by Claude Perrin, and she has sculptures of Andrew Bloch in the garden. So she wanted to have a guest house for artists and residents. And she invited at that time, 5 young architects. Well, some of them are still young. I'm not that young anymore. And this is what we proposed. But it has a similar language and a similar grammar that the Pitch Black show in Vienna. So around this time is where we start to figure it out, that there is a logic that we can work, and we start to develop a language that can mutate from one territory to another. But also we start to rethink a little bit about plans and sections and assembly as almost MRIs. It's not really X-rays the way that we were educated, but as MRIs, and rethink what is the role of that and how that operates. At the same family, but a couple of years later, we did this chair for the Art Institute in Chicago. It was a show called, I think, I don't even remember how it's called, the show. Anyway, so we were playing around with the IMS chair, and we put like a code, kind of a virus to mutate it, and we really play around for 2 or 3 days, and they like it, and we manufacture and we put it there. I really don't like it at all. It's one of the things that you never know which ones of the things that you're working on that will get done. So it's always important to work in all of them with the same level of care because you don't know. It turned out that people like it, and we did another version for a collector in gold. Painted in gold, sorry, not solid gold. Anyway, but out of the same family, this was the first time with the chairs and this one that we start to flirt openly with product design. Again, this is nothing new. Plenty of architects has done that in history. This was the first version that we did for Alessi in 2009, and it's the same in the same grammar. But also it's the way how the office start to change a little bit. I would say until PS1 and some of the other projects, I would be heavily modeling stuff. After that, it became more about to develop a mechanism of work with the language that also would mutate an installation for Selfridges in London or other series of projects, but also start to mutate the way that you communicate and work with the people in the office and how the people in the office start to become more prominent. Because a couple of things that come with technology. One is the people working with you, they usually become faster than you, and with the software and the tools and so on, it's difficult to keep up. And also, it starts to change how you relate to issues, and also to create more contamination, you need to start to open up the game. So in a way, I can divide the different periods of the work in the office. In the early ones, like many others, were working on the notion of biology. Then we incorporate ornaments, cinematic effects. Some of them keep going, artificial nature, rituals, and more recently, butchery. These were factors that we were throwing into the purity, let's say, of the software autocracy or the software tyranny, if you will. And to try to figure it out how there is a sense of authorship that you can manipulate. Unlike other people in this exploration, I always like the idea of authorship. I've never been interested in the idea of design without author. I've never been interested in that self-generative design. I find it interesting. I think there is a lot of people that have done fantastic work and really innovative work. I always been much more interested in this kind of electric mud, this kind of a combo between the roughness, between the perfection that comes from the software, a certain imperfection that it seems to me that there is a sense of humanity that it cannot be abandoned. And so this happens in competition, in this case for a museum in Spain. But the other thing that you can see that every phase that we go through the work is accumulative. I have zero capacity to cut things out or edit things out. That's what I was saying. For me, more is more, and I'm very literal about it. And I like to keep messing it up and adding more stuff. But in this one, we start to go back and to start with certain fascination and obsession into the plans. I really believe that architects can be divided into plan architects and section architects. There are very few who are really good in doing both. I think we are okay with plans. I think we're terrible with sections. We've never been good at sections. But that's how it goes. In parallel to that museum, we start to this kind of the Ornament Era. We did another version. Another crack to work with Alessi with a whole series of other tableware. This one has come back to life after 10 years. We are manufacturing 3 of them only for a collector in China. So we're right now trying to figure it out. Probably we're going to 3D print the metal and then polish it or something like that. We're doing certain adjustments, but it's basically the same piece with the glasses and trays, ashtrays, cutters, and this was another version for a candle holder. In the meantime, we always try to work. One of the things that I really love about computers is this idea of this fake sense of a scalelessness, that you can work with the same intensity or complexity. It doesn't matter almost the scale. It's a little bit like a Pollock painting, which is relentless in the pursuit of intensity. This is something that you can operate in that way if you're interested in. This was another installation that we did for the Mac, but in Los Angeles, in one of the garages of the Mac apartment. We decided to do a structure that was generated out of a particle cloud, and then every point of the cloud became a flower. So we hired a group of phenomenal women and people in the office that they did like funeral arrangements. So we built this out of flowers. The show was up for 3 months. And it started to smell bad and decay, and eventually everything collapsed. But that was interesting in the sense of 2 things. One was the notion of time and decay to start to become part of the process as we were using animation, so the issue of time and framing and sequencing was important in the design process. So the idea to incorporate decay as a factor of design was an important one around 2010, whatever it was. So when Francesca von Habsburg commissioned us to do this small museum pavilion in Patagonia, we start to play with that. The other option, the other thing that was interesting that emerged out of this was the notion of how the flower and nature can play a role in color. I'm absolutely horrible with colors. I don't know how to work with colors. So I thought that this was a really cool way to incorporate color in what you do without having to deal with it. But also it was a way to create this kind of a creepiness of disturbance into it. So that created a whole series of objects that deal with that. This was a chair that we were working for a German company for an exhibition. They was supposed to be unstable and you're supposed to be afraid to sit on it. Then we did this bench for Natalie Ceruzzi, the same woman that we were working on the guest house, and we did a version of it for a friend of us in Argentina in a ranch with cowhide. And so this was a kind of interesting moments of disruption because, and I will say that one way or another, what we're still working today, it was born in this period of 5-6 years ago, in which the literal started to become a really important role in this. I think anybody who works in form tend to, of course, work to the issue of abstraction. It's always an exercise of abstraction. But I always admire how artists have the freedom to work with literal. I mean, you can call it from Oldenburg, oversized binoculars or matches, or people like Lou Bourgeois with the oversized, the thing that she did with the oversized spiders. There was something really remarkable about the literal quality in our world, and in architecture is a little bit more difficult. So this became like a kind of an obsession, and in a way I still think we are in that period in the office. So this was a second version for the museum pavilion for the Thyssen-Bornemisza. So this one we really start to think about what if, okay, this is in Patagonia, what if we do have with cows and sheep, and we start to animalize the things. So they became fascinating kind of games to play, but at the same time, I thought it was an interesting kind of departure in terms of the certain monotony of the seamless quality that was coming out of the computer. These animations, they go forever, so that's why I'm cutting it, because I really want to get into the more recent work. See, the sections are horrible. But then, to take it even further, we start to look into butcheries and all forms of butchery. Butchery is really interesting because it's three-dimensional cut, and this idea of mass and assembly, and there is certain animal quality to it, which of course is interesting. So we wanted to do this big sculpture made out of meat. We wanted to mill meat and figure it out how to anodize it and incorporate metallic things, so didn't happen. Then we worked for a while with this company, this porcelain company in Limoges in France, to do these little lamps. There was a translucent porcelain. We wanted to do a series of lamps for kids that were like little cows. And at that time, yeah, I think we also did the chandelier, which was a little bit more disturbing than the little one. I don't know if it's playing or not. Well, doesn't matter. Out of that family, but less literal, we did this remote control for Chase JP Morgan Investment Bank in LA. They asked us to do 12 holders for the remote control that they have to call somebody to bring them coffee. The reason why I show this, because it's very tragic, because we made more money with that thing than we ever did with anything else. I don't want to discourage you guys, but find ways to keep the office going. Yeah, they pay us a lot for 10D things that we 3D print ourselves, we painted ourselves, and we brought it to them. Anyway, but after the remote, we did these coffee cups for Alessi in porcelain that they, of course, with our perfect timing for commercial success, we did it when Alessi decided to get out of the porcelain business and ceramic. Right now, we're doing other tests for a different company in China. Then we start to venture into art. This is something that Tom and Blythe Main commissioned us to do. So it's called popcorn. Literally, these are not renders. These are like this big. We scan popcorn. We put some ornaments. We paint it, and we call it art. But they're funny exercise. They're interesting exercise because they open your territory where things can go. So they're not all done with any clear purpose. I would say, as I said, the autopsy logic is an important one. You analyze kind of after, and that became the beginning of the next one, and you refine it by doing it. I really like this idea of refinement, that you work on something and you do it multiple times until you saturate it and you move into something else. At the same time, we try to also do other kind of things. This is something that we work with Carlos Edicios for Infonavit. He invited me as part of the things that they were doing of a series of speculative new forms of $10,000 single-family houses. So we did one of them. Other 9 people from SCI-Arc and many other schools were involved. Ours was not picked to be built, but our idea was a simple one. This was in a region, and they used to do water tanks, so we thought that we can use the structure of the water tanks, and they create a tensile structure for it. So during the day it can become this workshop that it can close and open, and at night can become a little house. It turned out that we're going to build a prototype this in the Mexican consulate, maybe in LA, because they want to do an exhibition. Many of these houses got built. And then we did Mercurial chewing gum, kind of art. These are very creepy. These are urn for the ashes of a couple in Los Angeles. They are not dead yet, but they're planning, and they wanted to have something artistic. The one in the left is the wife, the one in the right is the husband, and we came with flowers. Clients. In parallel to that, this notion of butchery and carving became an interesting thing. So we did this competition in Bogota in partner with Juan Rincon, which I think he taught here. In Bogota, Colombia, it was a national theater, and our goal was, it was a tricky project because you had to maximize, it was an expansion of the current theater, you had to maximize the footprint. So we wanted to do like a glass box, which is the way, the Latin American way. But then we wanted to carve and have this kind of a artificial nature monstrosity inside. So the animation is very deceiving because it reveals more. But the goal was that from the street, it would look like a very normative kind of thing. And then when you go inside into this courtyard, which is very typical in the colonial architecture in Latin America, or you will find it also in Barcelona and Madrid, in places like that. And to do this kind of a very messed up courtyard when you walk inside into the theater and all that. But it was literally one of the few projects that we started really with a solid volume, and we kind of start to carve. So at the end of the day, and it's funny because one usually tends to think that the work is different, and I like to think that the work is very different when I break it into categories and different phases of evolution and so on. But probably it looks from outside way more coherent than one we think, but so maybe the changes are too subtle. Around that time, we did a little bit like a backtrack to an older series of ideas. The Barcelona Regional Agency, which work with Barcelona and all the cities around Barcelona, commissioned us for a pedestrian bridge to connect Barcelona with San Adrià de Besòs. So we went back to some of the ideas of PS1 where we were working with more geometries and tubes and structure. So we wanted to create was kind of an elevated quasi-garden platform. This we work with Klaus Bollinger, which is a phenomenal engineer in Germany. And we came with this system that you can have like three variations of the structure that if you rotate enough can produce the effect that are all different. We moved quite farther with the project. We went farther enough to the point that we didn't went all the way to construction details, but we were pretty far into DD when the election came and the government that was in power lost the election. So we lost the commission with the election. So the bridge itself actually is only 25 meters because it's a little river that it goes to the Mediterranean Sea, and the rest is really like an elevated platform that goes into over the top of that, which is a kind of a bird reservoir ecological thing, ecological reservation. So this is what we were trying to figure it out, how to do it, how to produce it, how to rethink that, and how to work it through very few structures that you can keep rotating and changing to produce the effect of differentiation. We also did a more speculative thing for them too. It was the park, the thing will land. But this was we were on our way to try to figure out the structure, to make it light, and to have certain movement and so on. We were looking a lot into bamboos structure and stuff like that, but to do the metal. So that project died. Another commission that we were working with them, but didn't go that far, was another pedestrian cross, in this case between the Barcelona Zoo and the Barceloneta. But in this one was really much more aggressive of this idea. We wanted to do an elevated park. So this one was a little bit more aggressive in terms of speculation because we knew that they would not go anywhere. They wanted to have some concept. But we took a part of that, and then we did a much scale, a smaller version in Jojutla, which is in the skirts of Mexico City. We also work with Infonavit. This project is now a little bit in limbo, like having so many projects that people were working with Infonavit at the time because of change of government. It's not dead, we don't know what's going to happen. The original project was, we were commissioned to do one little bridge and 3 public plazas, and we convinced them to combine them, the bridge and the public plazas into one single thing, so an elevated platform that can connect the 2 neighborhoods, so the people can cross from one side to another in multiple ways, but also can become a place that people can occupy for weddings or quinceañera parties or anything that they will have a social activity. In a way, we were trying, again, the idea was to produce a sense of complexity by repetition of elements. So the idea was basically wood and metal that can be done with local fabricators and get the community involved. And all the lights are pretty much the same, but again, by doing movements here and there, will create the effect that there's a lot of variation. So this one, we're still working on it. We don't know what's going to happen. We are committed to the thing. We met with the neighbors. We have a lot of conversations about it. People in the area seems to be on board and excited. The mayor of the 2 small towns seem on board. So it's just a matter to see how the thing would evolve with the government of López Obrador, because this requires federal funding, which is very common trend in most of Latin American countries. For somehow I have that animation twice. I don't know what's coming here. And this is the Helsinki library, but some. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, it takes a while. I don't see it here. Going back to the narrative, this was another competition that we did for the public library in Helsinki. This was the kind of the literal with excessive ornament phase. These were looking a lot of Fabergé eggs. But in this case, what we were proposing was that the volume, it really will be like a winter park, and the library will happen in all the eggs. So we were flipping the program for it. It's one of the few times that we pay some attention to the program as a driving force. It was in the exhibition with the public, both people like it, but then when they went to the real jury, nothing happened. Anyway, so a library, clearly. We did another thing with the Fonabit was this prototype for an emergency house. So we came with this concept to have a concrete core, which it will be the plan. You can see in the plan, a concrete core that will be a kitchen and the bathroom, and the rest will be like a tent, so you can make it bigger or smaller according to it. Again, it died with the change of government, but the idea was to have this as all the tubes are the same, all the pieces are the same. We even talked with certain companies that were willing to donate the fabric and so on for case of earthquakes and so on, because one of the things in countries like Mexico and Haiti and many other countries, Latin America and Argentina, where I'm from, is emergency things tend to become very permanent for 2, 3, or 4 years, so they were looking for something that can have more stability. Of the Fabergé period, we were doing this lamp for a company in Italy. We proposed instead to do a lamp while we don't design a light bulb, so you can have this melt light bulb and you can have whatever appliance in your house, and you can just put the light bulb. We wanted to do it with Target or something like that. Didn't fly. Some flower ways. This is part of the most recent Butchery informal thing. Another version of the cover of the book. I don't know why it's here. Sorry. An office park waterfront in Shanghai that we were trying to figure it out, this notion of artificial nature or natural space. So the idea was to create an external office space so that people can walk and work outdoors, and so you have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and all the connections of it. So the idea was, this is not a public park, this was a private thing. So in a way, it started to trigger a whole series of new ideas about land art, which is something that now we are working in a couple of commissions in China. Now we have an agent. They're trying to get land art for us. So we've been looking into these bamboo things and to try to figure it out how we can get our things in a different trajectory. And through this project, it came a whole series of new opportunities for the office, which started to really more into product design and fashion. This was a whole series of urban structure from chairs, tables. This was a different thing commissioned by somebody in LA who wanted to donate and do these benches in the park, and we like the idea to have these hydroponic things into it, but I like it. I like the idea that they look like little animals. It's supposed to be grass, but it didn't look so good in green, so we changed the color. But I love this one. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to fabricate it even if it's for our own house. I'll have to convince Florencia to let me have it in the house. But we trade in. She can put one of her stuff. So when you are in the park, you don't know if that's an animal or a plant or whatever. So we are in this hairy phase, very animal things, which also trigger another things that we're developing right now called the Sharpay Chairs. We're working with a company in Mexico who does extraordinary. It's not bamboo. I don't know how it's called in English. It's mimbre. Anybody speak Spanish here? Well, it's like a super tiny, like basket, but these people are developing all this technology with robots, so we can do really strange things. So we can put it with flowers. So we're doing, it doesn't matter, it's like the basket thing. So we are doing this like lounge chair, ottomans, and we're doing different versions of it. The one that we are testing right now is this one, which again, our house will become the laboratory for it. I'm very obsessed with this. This is the electric math part of the lecture. The more recent work is where we are right now in this ultra distorted, borderline. No, well, some people will consider grotesque. These are little ones. These are chicken chairs. We want to do this for kids, made of the chicken. It look like a chicken skin. My two daughters love them, but my daughters are very peculiar. They root for the shark in Finding Nemo. And Darth Vader is her favorite character in Star Wars. So anyway, I don't know they are the right demographics. For any market study, I don't think they're the right ones. But I really like this kind of messy, dirty, digital manipulation of things that we wanted. This was one of the projects that Wolf Prix Comhimelon invited us to work with them. He was doing a master plan for expansion of a city, and he asked us to do the flower towers, which apparently the client was not convinced that they were flowers. But Wolf called it Mickey Mouse, nuclear, post-apocalyptic Mickey Mouse. Okay, but this is the other one we just collaborated recently for a water park in China. And Wolf is very generous trying to help me to get some work. I have to say that all the competitions that Wolf does in China, he wins. The two that we collaborate, he lost. So, sorry. I know you're trying your best, but clearly we are not helping the cause. So we did the bubbly pavilions. The other ones are all coupe. The master plan is all coupe. We did the one that they look like bubbles. But it was a lot of fun to work, and I mean, he's one of my heroes and one of my favorite architects in the world. So it was a lot of fun to work with them, and it was also a brutal lesson to learn about certain things and how to do things fast and expedient, and how to. It was a really a crash course to understand how to present things. We will never do these happy renders, so it was really fantastic experience to work and enjoy it. And I understand if we not do it again, since we bring you nothing but bad luck. But we have a lot of. It was incredibly rewarding experience to do it.
Stupid client.
I didn't say that. If the client is hearing, we like him. So the last two things I want to show you is something that we have been working more recent, and is part of this multidisciplinary thing that Winka was doing. It has to do with fashion. We start to work with certain people and investors in China, and we're working with a very smart woman who gave us this idea that we should be focusing healthcare fashion. This is something that is becoming big in China, an aging population, and to do products that can help with healthcare. So the first thing that we do is kind of a pollution mask. And these are just prototypes, we don't know yet, but the idea is that they will have sensors, so depends on the pollution, they will change the color. But also I thought it was interesting because people wear so many masks there that you don't know if they're smiling or not. So we thought that also if you're smiling, they will have a happy color, if you're serious. But it's really will be about the level of pollution. We're doing this for people with wrist fractures. We also did this series of buttons, so you can have a crappy jacket, but you can buy some cool buttons and just change the buttons. Zippers, earplugs, these and suffer for tinnitus, so the earplugs that you had to use for sound, they're really ugly. So I thought that it could be more like jewelry, but also I think it could be like for ear aids. It's also a way to say if you have any kind of health issue, to don't feel embarrassed about it and find a way to make it part of who you are, or to be comfortable with that idea. So we came with a whole series of notions. These are for people who have pacemakers, so you have to put it outside. This was, believe it or not, a colonoscopy bag vest. Different versions of it. This is an oxygen vest, so instead to carry your thing, you can have all these new ideas of how this can be working on it. So we are right now in the middle of manufacturing these prototypes. We will do an exhibition, I think May next year, and then we'll see where we go from there. That right now the technology or anything like that hasn't been figured out. This is the part that you can turn off the camera, please. There are NDAs in this thing, petitions. You can turn off the camera now if you want. This was a competition that we did fairly recent, was for the Museum of Writing in Korea. And this one is part of what I would say is maybe, which I think is becoming more evident in fashion, but we're trying to figure it out how that can become part of architecture discourse. Which in this case was to hide the architecture inside this three-dimensional garden. So the idea was from outside, it would not look like a building, it would look like again, oversized scale animal like we do with the chair or something like that. And then the museum itself will be kind of hidden into the thing. So the competition was set up in this gigantic park. I think many people did this competition. And then inside we will have all this nest of eggs in wood that they will hold exhibition spaces per se. It was kind of born of a previous competition iteration that we did for the Guggenheim Helsinki, which I think every architect in the world did, or the majority did, in which also it was part of the carving and this notion of hidden and literal things. So in a way we were trying to reverse maybe what Frank Gehry did in the Guggenheim Bilbao, in which the most unorthodox spaces are the public space, and the most orthodox spaces were the galleries. We tried to reverse that, in which we were doing the galleries very unorthodox and the public space a little bit more normative, which seems to, it turned out to be not a good idea because curators don't like those things. I mean, many other things that there were problems why I think it didn't work. But it was an interesting speculation too in this notion of the literal. So in this case, we were looking into mates, which is an object, in Argentina, an object, and oversize them. So it started to work between the scale, between products, products, fashion, and architecture, and start to get like a fluid interconnection between the ideas and the concepts of it, and how they can move a scale from one to the other. So that's what we were trying to aim for with this project. And in a way, I think it's a work in progress. I don't think we haven't figured it out at all. And I think that's okay. I think you have to have, in a way, to have that kind of a permanent state of anxiety in which I think you should never work all the time on certainties. And again, I think you develop a grammar or a style or whatever you want to call it, and I think you repeat it and you recombine it, and the way that you work became about resampling yourself and adding other agencies of contaminations into it and see what can come out of those things. I think the last project I want to show you is actually it's an older project, but in a way it became kind of the petri dish in which many of these ideas were born. And the idea was this is kind of it has a little bit of everything. This notion of the mutation and the species, but also parallel realities, and start to build narratives of cinematic effects that doesn't belong to the original nature, or they will not be in the thing. And how also you can establish a way to pitch like that. Those things I show you about the shoes, those shoes are not a commission. This is something that through relations with those companies, we're talking about it, and we're trying to propose to them and to discuss. So the nature of the game in terms of what constitutes the practice today is different. So for us, a multiple scale also has become a venue for us to self-organize and self-do things that we want to do, and then try to figure it out if there is somebody, there is an investor, there is a market, or somebody want to work, instead to keep waiting also for clients to call you. So in a way, competition for us, competition for architecture projects, they became that these super interesting platforms of laboratory to speculate about certain those ideas. So you can start to see how in this project, a lot of these notions were born, and you test it, and you had to go for it and see what you can do. I don't like to say, or I don't like to think that what we do is the only way or anything like that. I think everybody should find their own voice, and I also am very aware of the stream that the work presents to people. But at the end of the day, is what is in my head and the people that we work together in our heads. We try many times to try to do different versions of it, and we don't know how to do it. So there is also that level of honesty, which is at the end of the day, you have to do the work that you feel that you have to do, the one that you think you have the capacity to do it, and along the way try to understand and refine it and really work on it. I really believe in the idea of, and I know that this sounds strange to say in school, but I really believe in the idea, do first, think after. You can do both, awesome, but if you had to choose, do first and think after. I don't have, for example, a huge appreciation for ideas. I don't overvalue ideas. I think pretty much any idea can grow into something. To me, it's much more about how you develop a way of working through the things. So I tend to like very dumb, literal, simple ideas. I think they give you much more latitude how the things can be evolving and growing. I think if you start with overcomplicate or over-complex ideas, actually it limits you. But again, as I said at the beginning, I think I'm a man of simple taste when it comes to that. I know the irony of that in relation to the stuff I'm showing to you, but at the same time, it's very straightforward, it's very simple in the logic. So in a way, one could argue that the project changed over the years and the variables change and the agents of contamination change. But I always think that you're working always in the same project, one way or another. I really think, at least all the architects I admire, or designers I admire, or artists I admire, they always work in the same project again and again and again, and keep innovating. So it's a lifetime project, and you will spend all your life work on it. This is Keith Richard right now, 77 years old. He's still rocking and touring, and he's still trying to figure out how to keep evolving the sound. So that's it. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah.
Or not.
Hi, Hernan. I was one of the young when you came to present at the AA. I want to say 2004. The capacity that you showed, like the willingness to be brave and going into what you called the grotesque at the time, was for me really epic and continues to stay with me to the day. With the aesthetic appreciation of the grotesque, i.e., the difference between that and the picturesque or the sublime, what are your thoughts on how the discipline is changing in what you call the engines of contamination now, which is more about representation, more about the semiological?
Look, in a way, I think everything is kind of cyclical. Of course, there are things that change, but I think you can always expect it. There is always like a big push for formal aesthetics. There's always will be a reaction that goes into this semiology and representation and so on. I think it's fine. I think it's valid. I think the people working on that, they're trying to figure out their project and what does it mean. At the end, I really think what you do, you have your project and you have to stick to your guns. And your project sometimes will be part of a much larger audience or a much larger conversation, and sometimes it becomes a more isolated one. And it happens in those terms. Now I'm talking about as the director of the school. As a director of the school, you want to have the different points of views and the different voices in the school. I think it's a mistake to try to have a singular voice in the school. I think at any given time, because the school should have 2 or 3 points of view fighting for the soul of the school. We don't know nobody winning. So in a way, as a director, you want to support that. And then as a designer, you have your opinions. I mean, like we all designers, we don't like what anybody else does. That's a general rule. So in general, if you're interested in the formal and aesthetic project, it's very unlikely that you're going to be interested in the other one. That doesn't mean that you don't find it respectful, or it doesn't mean that you don't find it honest if people work towards that. I don't find it so compelling to me because I find it sometimes a little bit reactionary. But some people will say the same about my work. So I think it's just a matter of degrees about that. I just think that the question to me is, are we still trying to fight for the possibility for architecture and design to have any kind of power? I think part of the problem is I think we spend too much time doing internal fights over those things, instead to understand that the true enemy is outside there. It's not inside here. And I think that is something I really don't like about our discipline. I think we spend too much time trying to point those differences, instead to try to understand how these things can fuel each other. If you asked me this 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I would tell you something different for sure, but I'm a little bit older. As you get older, you also became much more respectful and tolerant from other point of view, because I think if there is a commitment to push it to the extreme, I think it's completely respectful. But I will tell you the same you asked me about minimalism. Like, I respect it, I think it's interesting, it's not my cup of tea, it's not what I crave for it, it's not what I enjoy, it's not what excites me. But I don't think there's particularly something wrong. That's different, which I think, to be complacent. And I think that's dangerous. But I think there's a danger also for this side of the camp. I think there is a danger for complacency and also intellectual laziness for people who are interested in the formal and aesthetic project. And they keep doing the same thing forever and ever. So I don't think anybody is excluded of that. I think it's part of the cycle. I think you have to go back. I think it always came that, like modernism, postmodernism came, they can come. They seem to be shorter and shorter. Like modernism seems to have a healthy 50, 60 years. Postmodernism got 20, 25. They can have like 3 years. Then the computer thing is still kind of going, but already we start questioning and too fast. So we have some kind of what I call digital postmodernism now, which again is not my cup of tea, but I think there is a lot of interesting stuff and interesting people doing things, and I don't think I'm immune to that influence neither. I think my interest in literal or pop or whatever, it has stuff to do that maybe have in common with people in that, but I don't know. I really think it's more about to understand the tragedy of the less power than we have, and I think we had to rethink a little bit as a creative force how we operate, because I don't think we're very smart when you compare with other fields that they seem to be way more strategic about how they coagulate around each other. But this is, I don't know, I think is a perennial thing in architecture, and particularly in academic architecture in the Anglo-Saxon world particularly. Sorry, probably I didn't answer what you asked, but. Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to see how you've applied sort of a similar process to different scales and theoretically different programs. But where I think I sort of lose track with you is the sort of like the referencing that takes place, and you're talking about nothing is original and everything is sort of a mutation of pre-existing things. And so first of all, I'm wondering, where did your project start? What are you borrowing from? And then second of all, I think that you sort of run into this problem of, if you're doing the aestheticized project, of potentially missing the source of the project to begin with.
Yeah.
For instance, the mask for pollution. In a way, I think this gets to your idea of agency of architecture. We're sort of missing the broader structural issue there, which is that pollution is the problem. And so aestheticizing that problem as a design opportunity is in itself sort of a resigning of ourselves to thinking of architecture as something that can only create an object, rather than create or even identify this issue. In a way, you're celebrating it.
I will not say I'm celebrating, but yeah, you're right, and there is an opportunism there. I will not disagree with your position, and I think it's the right one to have. I don't operate like that. I'm more a kind of a classical designer in that sense. I don't, and please do not be contaminated by my cynicism. I really don't think architecture have that power or capacity to take the big picture problem and solve it. I don't. That doesn't mean that we should not try. I'm not the right person in relation to that. So I think your criticism is valid. I think your point of view is real. Yes, you're right about that. I try to tackle other issues where I think I can help, like the emerging social housing in Mexico, something like that, which is closer to my own education in Argentina. It's a territory I feel more comfortable. I think I have a certain knowledge that I can work with it. The other one, I really don't, it's too big for me, and yeah, I mean, you're right in your assessment, so I will not disagree with that. But at the same time, I as a designer, you work in one way or another, you always work in a micro scale, whatever the problem is. Yes, there always is that kind of opportunism, so I think it's a fair criticism, but I don't have a really good answer for you on that, because it's not something that I operate in that, and I think there are people who are doing way better work than I am on that, and so on. So my focus was more. But one thing I will say that I think is important for you to keep in mind is the aestheticize something is not a banal or reductive thing. We should never undermine the power of design or beautification as a tool of change. This is something that sometimes in recent years, the discussion, let's say in the last 10 years, between social justice design versus design, which I think is a false dichotomy, and I don't think we should get trapped into that. Because you can see that the most successful, for example, social housing projects in history worldwide are the one that the quality of design was very elevated in terms of aesthetic too. It was not just efficient. And it produced a contagious effect on the people that feel proud of what they live, what they do, and so on. So I take the part of your criticism that I fair, but I will be careful to characterize, like, aestheticize something is a way to, I don't think it means automatic banalization of it. I will separate the two things. I think we have to be careful about that, because I think we undermine our own power. Like, I think this is part of the power of design, and I think it's represented. It still is expensive and so on, but you can think that's the power of the iPhone, or you can say that's the power of Tesla. You know, like the moment that there was a really interesting car that became electric, people start to consume it and so on, and then they come with a cheaper one, eventually will be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, hopefully. So we should not underestimate the power of that. That's been said, the other part that you're talking about, yes, we should be better at that. I should be better at that. I'm not that good at that. And the first one you asked, when the project started, the project never, it really started many years ago, and now it's almost like a permanent state of continuation. So it doesn't work really as a beginning of an end. It's more like an evolutive thing, not different than anything else than in life. So in that sense, it's much more, I put a lot of premium in the value of intuition in relation to that. So by now, it's like a gigantic encyclopedia of stuff that is floating there. So I think there are multiple breaking points, and I try to point to those, what are the moments that I think there were breaks and certain things that come in and so on. But yeah, I'm not much into beginnings or origins and so on.
Shall we have discussion next door?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.